First, I would like to thank you all for being today here with us on this event, where me, Igor Yoshevsky, and my colleague Miroslav Feric will talk about what are the top trends in front-end for 2022. And before we start, I would like to share a couple of words about Civus, the recent updates there. So recently we become part of one bigger family called Arikoma Group, where now we are even bigger than we were before. We are around, I don't know, 3,500 employees in 17 different offices within many different countries. So yeah, taking that in consideration means that now we have even more talented people working with us, being our colleagues, but as well we all have new opportunities, new, more interesting projects. And yeah, because of that, we have seen a lot of interesting stuff happening to the past year, but also the years before. And because of that, today we choose this topic to be part of this discussion. Of course, I would like to encourage all of you today, those that are here and as well those that are following us to the online link, to be eager to ask questions and to participate to this debate, because yeah, the main goal is to share the ideas, to share what's new, what is happening. It's not just me and Miroslav to speak about what we know or maybe what we have seen. So yeah, before I continue, I will just give a word to Miroslav to introduce himself, and we can proceed further.
Thank you, Igor. I'm Miroslav Eric from Belgrade office, telecom division. I have roughly about 8 years of experience as a full-time developer. And I started from the background of full-stack developer, but lately I'm mostly concentrating all my efforts into front-end. And I've been working on Civus for a year and a half, and as of this year, I'm a technical lead. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Miroslav. So, yeah, it's really interesting to mention that the front-end world is changing dramatically. It's like what is trend now, it might be obsolete in 6 months from now. And that's something we cannot change probably, not in the following next years. But there are some things that are really interesting and that are a standard in some way. So yeah, today I will try to emphasize some of them, to mention some of them. Of course, Miroslav will share his opinion as well. But I will start with the most general things which are really positive for the past year and this year as well. Taken from the European Union surveys of front-end developers. They came up with really interesting facts about what is happening currently in the front-end world in terms of technologies, in terms of teams, tools used, etc. And what was the conclusion is that now we don't have that situation that we have in the past, like one-man band developer. Now we have bigger teams where we have more or multiple front-end developers working together. And this as a trend will continue in future because it's expected that front-end will expand even further more, not to just what we know now, like the web, actually using the browsers and using the laptops, the mobile devices and tablets, but actually it will expand within automotive industry, the telecom industry, metaverse as a domain, etc., which means that we'll have even more interesting projects to come and even bigger teams. So what's also interesting here is that developers are mostly or mainly focusing on using either frameworks or libraries like React, Vue.js, Angular, and others. This is mainly because of the best practices that are embedded there. So if you want to work with one specific framework or library, the best way how you can do that is actually to follow the best practices for it. We all know that in JavaScript there are many different ways how you can achieve something, but at the end of the day, following the best practices gives the best end results. So with that, yeah, we have good trend in expansion of the usage of these libraries and frameworks, but as well there is some stabilization happening because it's not about which one is better anymore. Like previously, there was always this discussion, React is better than Angular, or Angular is better than React, or they are all worse in comparison to Vue, etc. So that's not the case anymore. Now people are somehow okay to use whatever they are using currently, and they are all focusing on stability and on usage of the standard libraries and standard methods. Of course, using any of these libraries or frameworks lead us to the situation where we have to build components. Therefore, the development now is somehow component-based. We are not anymore linked to just reading some meaningless or meaningful functions that are used somewhere only once. Now we are reading components that can be reusable, that can be rich. And of course, we can apply them not across one project, but if we read them well, actually we can apply them across many different projects. And if we go, actually, if we use the concept of framework agnostic components, then of course we can use them in any framework that currently exists for JavaScript. So until I'm still speaking about the intro part, what's good to be mentioned is that the progressive web applications are also becoming more popular. I had the chance to speak about them back in 2016 when they were something new on the market. But now with all this mobility of the users, their connectivity using different networks, some of them are stable, some of them unstable, etc. Having applications that are capable to work in an offline mode are even more desirable than previously, because we don't want to lose the users as our customers at the end of the day, because we were unable to make our application to work in an offline mode. Of course, there are a lot of things beside this offline mode that are part of the progressive web application, including the WCAG, which is accessibility of the web pages. Of course, here we have the performance part, the using of caching on the front end, but yeah, at the end of the day, probably the main track that we are getting here is because of this offline mode. Of course, the time will tell, but at least for now, developers are trying to somehow avoid for the users who are using mobile applications to download applications from store, instead of that to use these progressive web applications. And of course, another interesting thing, which is not really new, but it gets a lot of traction, is headless CMS. One example of that is Strapi CMS, or maybe Nuxt or Nest.js, where yeah, definitely developers can create many different functionalities on the backend part, but being able to achieve that in an easy way, instead of, I don't know, using WordPress, for example, or maybe building a custom-made API. These headless CMSs are covering pretty much everything on the backend. What is left is for the developers to work on the front-end part. So being here on these thoughts, actually, Miroslav, what is your opinion? Maybe you want to add something more here.
Well, I would just like to expand on the what you mentioned about most popular frameworks. It's not only about frameworks itself being more stable, it's the whole ecosystem actually around it. Because there are many common problems, translations, for example. This is what I'm currently working on. So it's about having stable tools around the main thing, whether it be Angular or Reactive View. So this is also very important part that is sometimes the driving factor when the new project managers are deciding or approving what tool to use. And about the frameworks itself, we will also come to that a little more later. But for years, we are now seeing the trend, some trends about that. I don't think this has changed very much, but the general rule is that Angular and React, I mean, those are maybe just prejudices, but Angular and React are mainly for big enterprise level projects, and Vue is still mostly used for smaller apps that are not expected to scale too much, even though, I mean, it can still be used anywhere. But there are some trends, and there are also some, I mean, there are always new JavaScript frameworks. Every week there is another new framework, but there is also new Star. It's not so new, but I would also like to mention Svelte. That is gaining a lot of traction as of recently. That is completely changing the paradigm, because all those three, the Holy Trinity, Angular, Vue, and React, are realistically bundlers. So you have the framework itself bundled with the code, compiled code or transpiled code that you make, and Svelte is completely different story. It is true compiler. You don't have any bundles, so you get minimalistic, very small file sizes in the end, and it's beating everyone else in the performance tests. And it's also being used on some small devices, handheld devices, maybe point-of-sale devices and things like that. There are some very good experiments in that regard. And also some other frameworks that might be gaining traction in the future, it's not sure. For example, Solid.js would be a good example that is doing exactly the same thing as Svelte, only slightly different fashion. You will notice that lots of frameworks are stealing ideas one from each other. So it's getting some common problems are getting common solutions. So when you examine the frameworks in how they work under the hood, you will notice also some trends there. But we'll come to that later.
Yeah, and until we are on the still on the same topic, actually, it's good to mention that one thing didn't change through the years. That was that the basics of the JavaScript are still the same. So before you start to use any of these frameworks or libraries, it's really good to start with the basics, to learn the language first, then to move to any of these libraries or frameworks. And that's because we get to a situation where developers might be able to work with one framework or one library in a really good way. But when some request came which is not traditional or not something mentioned within this library or framework, they often struggle to find solution or even to understand how they are going to solve it. At the end of the day, all these frameworks are JavaScript, so they are not something new in that matter. Meaning that if you are good in JavaScript, you don't have to depend solely on the framework itself or on the library itself. That's why it's really important to gain more knowledge of the first, of course, of the basics of the JavaScript, then of the more advanced usage. And yeah, definitely following the latest trends within ECMAScript standard, where things are getting even better and better. And with that, JavaScript becomes used worldwide, but which is really strange, it becomes to be used even on devices that we are not expecting. Like you can now have complete UI interface for, let's say, Raspberry Pi built with JavaScript instead of C++. People were going extra mile to build actually a compiler where we are reading JavaScript, it generates C++ code just to make things easier for front-end developers to produce even more richful content for other type of devices that are not really common in front-end world, like they are not computers or they are not handheld devices. So yeah, with that, it's good to be mentioned that at least currently the most popular library for handling of the dates, because the dates are the biggest issue, I believe, to every developer, especially when we have to build something across different time zones. The most popular one is Date FNS, which is new and better replacement for Moment.js, because Moment is not supported for some 5 years now, and everything that they have built, it was excellent, but simply is not doing the job anymore.
And it was bloated a lot. Basically,
Yeah.
you need just one small functionality and you get many kilobytes for nothing. So, and DateFNS actually works really well. It works with Webpack, Rollup, and Modern Bundlers, so you can just use what you need, so you don't need 100 kilobytes just for one simple functionality, your locale.
Yeah, so simply said, you're getting a lot of functions there that are doing different kinds of operation with the dates. And you can definitely extract only those that you need. You don't have the whole bundle as it was for Moment.js. Then, of course, as GraphQL became popular, Apollo GraphQL became popular library as well. And that will be a trend for the years that come, because somehow the RESTful API, I mean, it's okay, but it doesn't often provides everything that we need. Or it's really robust. It spends a lot of time for developers to create additional API endpoints, API calls to cover what is needed for the developers on the front-end side, where GraphQL handles this on a better way. And with that, yeah, we have the possibility to play around with the data using GraphQL. Of course, one of the libraries that was mainly used for Angular was React.js, but as a library, it's really applicable even with React and Vue.js as well. And I would recommend to everybody to at least try it. You will see that once you learn it, how to use it, most probably you will get away from Redux entirely, because this library does a lot of operations like Redux does, but is not the same pattern. I mean, there is not a store, but it uses observables, which are even easier and better for handling in comparison to the store itself.
And yeah, observables are and the whole way of working with RxJS is it completely changes the way that you develop components. So Angular is my specialty. This is what I'm working on most lately. I'd argue that RxJS is the biggest pain point for intermediate level developers trying to progress. So one of my duties as a technical lead is to hold interviews for new candidates for CEUs, and I believe someone somewhere in the audience, probably online, is the guy that I interviewed. And after so many interviews, I've noticed some trends, some recurring trends, and this is most of the candidates eventually land in the intermediate spectrum. And this is the biggest problem that they have, that I notice. It's not that they don't understand what is RxJS, but I see lots of gaps here. So, and there's certainly the single most important topic that they can improve on to progress towards more senior levels. And when you fully embrace RxJS and the observables, then you get to this is actually about another topic, Angular. This is for some time been the trend. It's not about Angular itself, it's about the way how you structure your code, and more precisely how you structure the data flow. And I suggest everyone who hasn't already to Google out reactive pattern Angular. And because the whole pattern, I mean, those who know already know what I'm talking about, but it's a completely different way how you structure your code. It's no longer imperative. Basically, you're creating flows and connecting data. Eventually, your code gets much smaller. There are a lot fewer bugs that you would normally get. And it is probably the best pattern I could recommend if you want to make a really big, huge size project. Like I'm working on an enterprise level project right now that has been ongoing for 2 years, and we have roughly about 1,000 components. There are exactly 45 modules. I had to count them recently. And there are about 50 people involved, 30 of which are front-end devs. So when you're working on that scale, then things like this really matter, because you might end up having to do refactoring that will take literally months. I'll also come to that later. I've done it. So if you are working in Angular, if you want to progress more, that I would suggest concentrate on RxJS. This is probably the biggest step that you have to step over to progress any further.
Yeah, I agree. So, yeah, before we continue, I mean, does anyone want to add something, like maybe share your experience with any of these libraries, you like it, or maybe you don't like them? As well, those who are following through the WebEx, you can write the questions there, so they will be sent to us. If anyone. If not, I mean, you can interrupt us at any time, so it's okay. So, yeah, in fashion of Angular, because we were speaking about RxJS, so my idea was to continue with more updates about the current frameworks and libraries, the popular ones, of course. And yeah, besides RxJS, what is new and interesting thing for Angular in the version 13, they have had some new features or improved some of the existing ones. Like they have improved their unit testing library. Actually, they have made some enhancements, so now it spends even less memory than previously. And it takes way more less time to execute the tests on the client side, actually on the developer machine or CI/CD, whatever. So yeah, new thing there is that now from version 13, it's 100% Ivy. There is no more Vue engine. I don't know how much of you have used the Vue engine. It was, I can say, interesting concept. You can switch between different modes within the components, but somehow it turns out that it was extra. I mean, you didn't need to use it pretty much at any time when you work on the project. You can solely depend only on what's default within Angular itself. You don't have to change anything. But yeah, it has its purpose, but because a lot of changes came with Ivy engine, now actually the Angular itself works in a different way. Then, of course, there is no need of the ngCC compatibility compiler anymore, because even in the previous versions, starting from version 9, the team from Google was making slow progression or slow changes of the code to go towards Ivy itself. So if you have a project that is ongoing, or maybe started a project with Angular version 9 or version 10, then most likely you will be, you can actually move it to newer version even easier than it was previously, because the main problem was how to switch between, let's say, version 2 to version 4, then from version 4 to 6, and then from 6 to 9. Because version between 6 and version 9 were, I mean, 6, 7, and 8 were pretty much the same, but breaking change came to version 9, and afterwards the migration to newer version, if you were using the best practices of Angular, of course, was really simple. You had to change maybe some minor stuff, or even you could use their tool just to give you a new setup how to run the project, and everything was done automatically for you. Then, of course, they have this improved bundler, which is using ES build. Now it's working with version 2020. And also there is no support for Internet 11 browser because of these polyfills. So if you still have to support this version of Internet Explorer, you'll have to roll back to earlier version of Angular, or simply adding the polyfills, but with that actually you are using the benefit of having small bundle of the project itself. So instead of having, let's say, 100 kilobytes of bundle, the Angular will become bigger again, around 600 to 700, maybe 1 megabyte, which is too much for front-end bundle in comparison to React or Vue.js. And yeah, there is no need for component factory resolver anymore, which is really good enhancement, because previously if we want to load some component within another in a way to access to the properties, etc., as a class, we had to use this factory resolver, but now that's all have been handled by the IVE engine itself, and Angular know how to handle this directly. So yeah, you are simply just including the component and do whatever you have to do with it. Miroslav, you have something more on Angular, or
no?
No?
I mean,
okay.
Just to mention that IVE engine also introduced some other performance improvements, and it is overall much better solution than before. And I mean, Angular is now on a steady path. They keep improving and pushing new versions every 6 months. So Google guys are just doing a good thing there, and they're completely transparent about their roadmap. So Angular will keep going that way, and by now it is established as the go-to tool for big size, or dare I say, enterprise level projects. So it is the very first thing that people will pick, also for many other reasons and toolings, and it's also maybe controversial topic, but it's very opinionated. It is how it was built, so with batteries included, and this is actually a very good thing when you're working with a big team. So where maybe like Spirit developers or developers for other background do not have too much room for creativity, because it will the moment you step away from established standards, it will bite you back.
Yeah, actually, I believe that will happen in any library, but
yeah, but some are more restrictive. Like
right. Yeah, yeah, definitely. Angular keeps to its best practices, its core. If you move away from it, it's a bit hard to get back. But yeah, okay. So the next new things that were happening were within Vue.js, where with the version 3, actually, they had provided some new stuff, and eventually it will get Vue.js to become even more popular that currently it is, because as Miroslav mentioned, it was okay, it was used, but somehow there was always something, I don't know, either missing or it was opinionated. Like, from my experience and from the interviews, I can tell you that most of the Vue.js developers were, for example, full stack developers working with PHP, because Vue.js had great integration with PHP as a Vue engine. But that doesn't mean that there aren't Vue.js developers that are solely front-end developers. But if they had to choose, for example, most likely they will choose React over Vue.js. But now with version 3, actually they have implemented this composition API, which is really similar to React hooks. And with that, they provide bigger flexibility of the Vue.js. and a better way how to, for each developer, how to express himself. Then, of course, they provided better support for the virtual DOM. It was okay previously, but yeah, definitely there were some pain points they had to improve, especially in the rendering of big amount of data. Like if you have to render, I don't know, 10,000 or 100,000 of records, React was always more performant in comparison to Vue.js, knowing that they were both using the virtual DOM. It was somehow expected they both will be or will behave similarly. They will have the same results, but yeah, with version 2 that wasn't the case. Now with version 3, they are catching up, and I think they're almost there. Then definitely adding of fragments, which wasn't the case previously, where you can add fragments as part of the code within the code, but when you render them within the browser, they are not visible, but yeah, they serve a great purpose for structuring of the code and for dividing some units within the code itself. And yeah, they have implemented simpler state management called, Pinia.
Pinia.
Yeah, which also improved the way how the state it's handled, but as well how the developers are working or reading anything related to the state management itself. I don't know.
But the Vuex is still there. So
yeah.
the thing about Vue 3, they introduced this new composition API. So it's a complete shift from what was previously Vue doing and how they were doing. And what Igor mentioned about backend guys loving Vue.js, that was me, yeah. So I used it a lot, and Vue was a pleasure to work with because you can make it whatever you want. I mean, if you need it just on one page as a mini app on one portion of the page, you can do it. If you want to do full-blown SPA, you can do it. So it was always working fine, and it was very performant. And the thing about composition API, I personally find it interesting because I'm a bit older as a developer. I've seen some things previously, how they were being done. I work with jQuery, and there are some things that younger developers probably don't know, things like revealing pattern. That's a special way of how typically JavaScript libraries have been done and how you would structure your jQuery application. And this composition API totally reminds me of revealing pattern that we've been using from before. But the good thing is this is not being enforced. This is not a breaking change, unlike Angular guys that are doing breaking changes every year. They give you the option. You can still use the Vue.js the old way, as you're used to. I'm talking about Vue 2.6 as the golden standard. And or the new composition API, however you like it. You can mix it one component this way, the other component that way. The thing about Vue 3, I'm not sure if the Vuex and Vue Router are fully ready just yet. I know the framework is, but there is still some work to make it fully compatible with the new Vue 3. But they're getting there, and there are no longer complaints about. Previously, there were always complaints about Vue when it started taking off. People complained about it as one-man show. It was Evan You, and he alone was working on this. And he didn't just work it out of nowhere. He was an ex-Google employee. He was working on Angular JS, so Angular version 1 before. And he had some different ideas on his own. But so now there is a whole team working on Vue, so it's no longer one-man show, and it's pretty stable and widely adopted, and one of the top 3 frameworks used all time.
Yeah. So any of you using Vue with PHP so far? Or no? Or not using Vue at all? Okay. And yeah, from these 3 most popular, we left with React. They also had a lot of changes in the past 2 years, I can say, where they have added this context API, then also add this Redux toolkit as a replacement of older version or older library of Redux, which, at least for me, it reminds me like they have embedded Tank within Redux in the way how it works. Previously, that kind of code
I
was
wanted to say finally.
yeah, I mean, yeah, there were different libraries like Saga, Tank, Mobix, etc. that can be used with Redux, but Tank was somehow the simplest one, especially if you are not building something complex and if you don't really need some complex scenarios there. So yeah, what they did with this Redux toolkit actually reminds me really much of the Redux plus Redux Tank. Then, yeah, what's new there? They have actually added automatic patching, which means that if you have one function and within that function you are calling multiple different functions that are changing something, the React is not going to re-render the component immediately. Actually, it will wait for each of these functions to finish with their execution, and it will render the component only once at the end of the execution. And that's good enhancement, because previously we have to find the ways how we are going to organize the code or organize the flow within the component or multiple components to avoid multiple re-renders. And now we have this out of the box with this automatic batching. And of course, the transitions, which are new improvement, especially of the UI part. And for the users, because previously we were also creating some custom solutions to let the users know that something has to be loaded. So we were placing some placeholder there. And now that's I can call it standard or library embedded within React. So you can use it by default. You just have to use it through transitions. And whenever there is transition need to happen, until the data are provided, the user will see this placeholder or whatever you're going to place there to notify the user that something will have to load from somewhere and the user have to wait. And this really improves the experience for the users, because if the application doesn't have some kind of loader or placeholder or anything that can tell me that I have to wait, users are either furious, they are going to click on the same button multiple times until something happens, and most likely they will break the application, or I don't know, or they are simply going to leave it like, okay, I've clicked here, nothing happens, I can't see any changes, I will close the application. But actually, if they have patience and wait for a couple of more seconds, most probably they would be able to see this new change that they were expecting to see. So yeah, with these transitions, actually we can enrich the UI and the experience for the end users as well.
So yeah, I would just like to add some few words about what we started with about Redux Toolkit. So Redux is still there. It's not going anywhere. There are lots of legacy code that will need maintaining, that is already in progress. So the old way, map state to props, map dispatch to props, and Redux Tank for asynchronous operations, it's still not going anywhere. But if I were to start new React application today, I would probably go with Redux Toolkit, because it really, I mean, in the end, it is still Redux, but it's completely simplified. So lots of boilerplate code has been removed. And there are, at least from my experience with interview candidates regarding React, there is also Recoil I've noticed being used a lot. But I'd say that today, by today's standard, that Redux Toolkit is the go-to solution, let's say, if you're starting new. And you still have all the goodies about Redux developer tools and time travel debugging and so on.
Yeah. So yeah, Miroslav, you mentioned you had pain points or issues working on the project, especially with one of the popular libraries, which is Storybook,
Yeah.
and it's highly recommended to be used if you are building really big application, but as well if you want to have reusable UI, something like if we take Bootstrap, for example, or maybe Material UI or any other. So if you want to build your own UI, then Storybook is definitely way to go. But yeah, Miroslav can share more
Yeah,
pain
actually,
points on that.
basically, we have a big application with roughly about 200 components that I'm estimating. That's probably more. And for those components, reusable components, we are using Storybook. So Storybook as a tool is an awesome tool. And you can have it for Angular, for React, for Vue, whatever. So basically, if you haven't seen it, it's a testing and demoing environment when you can load your component in so-called stories, and then you can see how that component looks like. You can provide different states, whether how the component looks like enabled, disabled, and then in the stories you can quickly check how it is used, what kind of properties it expects. So it's a very good tool, but I wanted to just to point out that there are some dangers that you might not be aware. It's not about Storybook. Storybook works fine, but it's about the way you organize your own components. Basically, no one could, I guess when the project started, no one could anticipate how big it will go. So it first started there just being dumped all in one folder. So now imagine 200 components in one folder. It was unmanageable. And today we have like more than 40 modules. And modules are basically organized by main features. So usually when you look at the application, you have the idea about what is connected. And when you look at the components, you could not get a clue what is what, and also similar names and so on. So I've been given the task to refactor all of it. And it took me like 2 months to sort it all out. And there was also another problem. We started as those libraries as little packages that you import through Node. So if you, for example, if some component is not doing well and you fix it, now you have to update it in a different repository. You have to upload it to a special server. There was a port where you can pull this library, and then you have to install it in Node.js, and then only then you could test it in the actual application where it was needed. So one part that I also refactored was to being used directly in the application. So basically, where is the source folder? Immediately next to source folder at the same root level, there was a library. So I pulled it all there. And then I made a special Node.js script. I mean, it's not that complicated as it sounds. It's just script that is copying file, basically. So I can extract those components and make a separate library, because the idea was to reuse those components in future application. And this was tested and it works. But the whole process of refactoring components, fixing some bugs, sorting them out into separate modules, into some logical sections, took me about 2 months. And when the final time came to deploy it, there were some minor, all the developers were asked to check, and there were some minor issues. Few components were not behaving properly. I fixed it in the next 2 or 3 days, and it was finally merged into the main branch, and the old repository has been frozen for future commits, and from that point on we work directly. So now when you make the changes in the component, not only does it immediately reflect in the Storybook, but also in the app. So the whole workflow was way better, and it was a huge success. I've got lots of praises, and when the time came for evaluation, when Sivus asks the client how they're satisfied with my work, I've got some stellar evaluations, and nothing personal to complain about, but looking from a different perspective, what actually happened that one senior level developer has been stuck for 2 months sorting out the mess instead of working on a new feature, for example. So I just want to point out, be very careful how you organize your components. And if it looks like a container, then it's probably not a good idea to have it shared. So move it to shared module in Angular, for example. And so keep the components to a bare minimum. Do not break the singular responsibility principle, because this is what we broke on in many places, and that cost us dearly, like 2 months of extra work refactoring I mean, that could have been prevented with better planning. But I guess no one could anticipate at the moment when it started. People just starting adding more and more, and so just be aware of that. But other than that, Storybook is an awesome tool. I would highly recommend it. It's not, from what I've seen, at least that's my impression, it's not that popular in smaller teams, but in bigger teams, they do understand why it's important. And for example, on the project I'm working on, we have it, we use it. Highly recommend it.
Yeah, I will just add what you've mentioned about the teams and the companies. Definitely, I can tell for sure that companies that are currently in the Forbes top 500 from the IT domain, actually most of them are using Storybook as a library for their components because, yeah, definitely most of them are product-based companies that are developing their own products or services that are offered to clients. But at the end of the day, they saw the benefit of having their own framework, or we can call it framework. It doesn't have to be. Yeah, they can simply have just bunch of components there they want to reuse. It doesn't have to have everything. But it saves a lot of time for them in future in terms of how much time they spend to develop something and how much time they spend on the branding part and on the UI part in general. Because most of the components were done. They were simply getting them from there. They were able to see them, how they work, at least as a demo. Like Miroslav mentioned, you can see how the button look when pressed, when hover over, or if you change the properties.
Yes, typically you do. They're so-called stories. So every story is different state of the component, and typically how you do it, you show the way how it can be used. So when you click on the story, you can see it enabled, disabled, with drop. Maybe if you have a drop down, you can create like one option is not available, is disabled, and others. So many variations, and then you create all the different cases in stories, and you provide the data, typically params that component is getting. So it is very useful for if someone needs to use this component, they can immediately see what params it accepts, what they want to get, how they can get it. So it's much easier to explain to someone completely new, this is how you use it. They can just test themselves how to use it. So if you have bigger teams, there are lots of less meetings about knowledge transfer, so-called, and like you can just check it yourself. It's that simple.
Yeah, and definitely you can provide better unit testing for that kind of components because they are not directly involved within the whole business flow, etc. You're simply testing. Actually, you're simply writing unit tests for a component, not integration test or not test with mockups from API, etc. You're just testing that component, how it's going to work. Of course, in a later stage within the project, you can include many different kind of testing, including QA people doing a manual, automated regression, etc. But in terms of the code itself, you can definitely have unit tested Storybook components, which are reusable, and your code, which can and cannot be tested. Well, depends. It's really good practice always to be tested, but sometimes we are facing with a situation where either the team is not ready to read unit tests, or maybe the client is not willing to spend time on unit tests, or whatever the case is. It might happen we don't have unit test coverage. So yeah, that leads us to next, I would say, topic, which is somehow linked with all these frameworks and these libraries, which is actually micro frontends that is popular currently and becoming even more popular in future. So yeah, so far we were focused on building single page applications, but they were somehow monoliths or module-based monoliths where we have good organization within the code, split between different modules or business features or whatever the case is, but At the end of the day, that was one big monolith application. So now, yeah, the world, the developers are trying to move toward this micro frontend as a pattern, because that allows us to use different kind of libraries and different kind of frameworks for different parts of the application. So we don't have to develop everything with React or Angular or Vue.js. If there is more meaning or better usability to use Felt or to use, I don't know, something else for some part of the application, then we are going to build that as a micro frontend using that particular library. Then, for example, if we have application that depends a lot of on real data rendering, but as well huge number of data rendering, then definitely we can cover that part with React, for example. So that leads us where within Storybook we can create a library or framework agnostic components which are built purely with JavaScript or TypeScript if you prefer, but they are not tightly linked with any of these libraries or frameworks, but you can easily import them within any of these and you can use them there. With that, actually, of course, you'll get a tested component, but you will short the time for development. And yeah, if you're working with micro frontends, you will take care that the look and feel of every of these micro frontends is the same. Of course, you can maybe change the design if needed, like, I don't know, for one micro frontend, the branding can be one color, for another micro frontend can be another. That's pretty much okay, but at the end of the day, how the components are acting and reacting towards user interaction can be kept to be same and standard across all these micro frontends. And yeah, when we are at the real-time data, of course, WebSockets, they were popular as well. They increased their popularity with the chatbots, with this real score data for gaming, gambling, domain websites, etc. But now they are getting a lot more traction because somehow everything we do becomes more real-time based. It's not like I will send something today and I'm okay to wait till tomorrow to get an answer for that. That was maybe okay for 2016, for example, but now people or the users are dependent on immediate response, on immediate I don't know, change or whatever they are doing on the actual application. Therefore, we can still rely on the RESTful API. That's pretty much okay. But if we want to avoid a lot of problems with long pooling or getting the data in real time, not overloading the server, etc., the better option is then to use the WebSockets, because we establish permanent connection between the client and the server, and later they are just interacting through events between them. So if some event happened on the front-end side, it will notify the backend and vice versa. So with that, actually, we get to the point where now when this 5G network became a standard, WebSockets will be used even more, but that somehow, I can say, forced through this metaverse domain that solely depends on WebSockets, blockchain, and 5G network. That's because resources used for metaverse are quite big. For example, if you want high quality images and pictures, etc., or avatars, they are more than 10 megabytes each. So if we want all these people here in the room to be replaced with avatars, and as well this to be a metaverse containing all these tables, computers, etc., this means that this room will take around 1 gigabyte of data transfer between the client and the server. So it's not that it's a lot of data. The 5G will cover that part where we are going to have higher network speeds, meaning that we will be able to download 1 gigabyte as we are now downloading 10 megabytes, for example. But as well, it's really crucial for the WebSockets and for the further interaction. As the avatar moves through the environment here, for example, that should be replicated to every other instance that is taking a presence or part of that same metaverse. So if we were a metaverse now, if I start to walk across the room, on each of your devices, you should see me doing that. And that must happen in the real time. I don't know how many of you were playing these RPG games where, I don't know, Warcraft or League of Legends or any others. They were metaverse even before we know what is the metaverse. I mean, the game itself, it's a world for itself. It has avatars, it has a story. People are doing a lot of things there. They had a lot of live data happening, but now that's coming to the web, coming to the front end especially, and it will change the world in general, the world as a Earth, but as well it will change the world of how we are working with the front end. Till now, we were working on building web pages that are pretty much, I call it 1D, but actually it's 2D, two-dimensional, where we are placing buttons that are having some hovering effects, maybe some parallax, etc. But slowly, the transition will move toward 3D. Therefore, the web consortium, I can say, is preparing to have even better support of WebGL. The WebGL itself is building even better compilers and better support for all the browsers. Then the browsers are participating as well, because everything will happen within the browser, but it will be a 3D. I can tell you that currently, if we take the most powerful laptop or personal computer, static one, regardless how many cores it has, what kind of graphic card, etc., most likely it will not be able to support metaverse party with around 20 attendees. It will simply crash because of a lot of interactions that are happening, but as well because the CPU is constantly active, doing recalculation of the position of every element within that universe. With that, actually, we need even more powerful computers, more improvements within the front-end world, within the WebGL, of course. And why I'm mentioning the front-end, because maybe for the time being, most of the things will be handled by the Unity developers. As they are doing currently, they will use Unity to cover the 3D part. They will provide us with, let's say, simply call it video, that we are going to put it within a page. But that's not sustainable on a long run. Definitely we'll have to start to build metaverses using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. That's possible today. It's not something that is not possible. Definitely we can build that. There are a couple of libraries that are supporting that. Of course, we have to use these 3D objects like OBJ wave format, or maybe 3ds or others. But regardless of that, there is currently possibility to build metaverse, I can say, just using HTML at the end of the day, because it's one library you have to use for JavaScript that will give you a new set of HTML tags that you can use to create a metaverse. But that will be a really limited one. If you want the full experience, if you want to use Oculus, HoloLens, etc., then definitely we'll have to focus on development of JavaScript to add support for this as well. And yeah, to improve the UI part to CSS and to HTML. Of course, it's also really easy these days to use, for example, React or Angular or Vue.js as a library or framework where we are going to embed this metaverse, and we will provide different scenes or stories for the users. Depends on yeah, what is their interaction within the metaverse itself. So it's really interesting concept. I believe as the time passes, the years comes, you'll have the opportunity to try it. It's really new experience, I can say, because you are not moving the mouse to click here. Actually, you are moving the whole hand to click the button there to make some purchase, for example, of a t-shirt or sneakers or whatever the case is. And yeah, maybe the world went crazy about NFT tokens, but they will become reality no matter how stupid it sounds. I mean, people will start to try t-shirts on their avatar before they purchase them for real them. And how is this possible? I'm not sure. Have you followed? Google has developed a device which is like, I don't know, like a small table where you are putting your hands on top of it, and that provides some microwaves that are imitating the material that is actually on that particular item that you are seeing on the screen. So currently there is no smell, but if there is a silk, you will feel the silk on your fingers through that device, and it's really cool. And that will maybe in 5 years become something traditional as an item that all of us, or maybe the tech guys, we are going to have it at home because we are going to use that to develop further front-end applications for the customers through the world. So yeah, this is something we have to see how it's going to develop, but definitely it's something that we don't want to miss. And as the things are currently, we are moving towards that direction. And yeah, one more thing. I think I mentioned a lot, but Cypress, it becomes a standard now for testing because it's really easy to be set up in comparison to Selenium, for example. And yeah, Cypress is somehow descendant from Protractor, which is descendant from Puppeteer. But yeah, they have embedded what is the best from each of them. So we got Cypress today. And it's something you really have to try, maybe not on the project you are working if you don't have the opportunity, but to try it at home when you have free time, because it's really easy to learn. But at the end of the day, it gives you a lot of benefits when you do testing of the application itself.
And it's becoming the norm, definitely.
Yeah.
It is now go-to end-to-end testing framework. Has some really cool features, like you can go through snapshots and see if something fell exactly at what point after what action it failed. We are using it on our project, so it's definitely here to stay.
Yeah, so you don't have to tell to your client it works on my laptop, or please send me a video. You're simply executing the same scenario through Cypress, and you will see where the error happens and why. Yeah, sometimes there are differences between different environments, like development, QA, production, because of different data or different data format, etc. But yeah, Cypress provides a lot of benefits for development, and it's really a good thing to start to use if you didn't have a chance to use it so far. Yeah, I don't know, Miroslav, do you want to add something more, or we can move to the domains part, what's popular, what isn't?
No, carry on.
Okay. So yeah, in the years to follow, definitely the domains of the popularity are changing. I mean, that was the case previously as well. During the Corona pandemic, we have this situation called digitalization, where everyone in the world who didn't want to have web page at all had started to think in a different way, or in a different manner, because their business were failing, so they have to do a digitalization for their companies. That was interesting for this region at the Balkan here, because yeah, older people are not really good in using these websites, online purchasing, etc. And yeah, they were like, I have to go to the store, to the grocery store, to see the tomato, to touch it before I buy it. But during the corona, that was not possible, maybe not entirely. So even the customers, not just the grocery stores, had to switch how they work, had to provide online services, online delivery, and yeah, with that, the world moved to next. I can call it revolution. Maybe it's not a revolution, but yeah, uh, definitely more things are to come. And yeah, I will mention again this metaverse because that dictates a lot of things that are going to be trend in the future, in the years to come, especially in the e-commerce area. As I mentioned, this e-commerce web page or web application that we know currently are not going to be popular anymore because the users are going to look for metaverses or e-commerce applications that are offering for the user to pick different kind of clothes, to try them on their avatar, to see the combination, and then to buy it. So with that, the experience is completely different that we have to build for them, for the users at the end. And yeah, definitely it will change the way how the e-commerce domain works, but it will become even more popular with that. Of course, if the e-commerce changed, then the retail will change as well because they are their backbone. They have to supply them, of course, the logistic parts. So with that, these two domains are becoming also popular in the years to come. Then the crypto trading. That's interesting topic today because the market is falling, is not really popular as it was before the war in Ukraine, for example. But yeah, hopefully it will get back on track because cryptocurrencies are something really important for the metaverse. They are not going to give you post terminal at home where you can touch your credit card, or maybe on your VR socket you can touch your credit card then to buy it. We'll have to use virtual currencies. Maybe we are not going to be able to trade them as we are doing now, but still the countries are considering to implement cryptocurrencies. And because everything is handled on some kind of interface through the web, that means that frontend will have to cover. Of course, Big Slack will be given to the mobile applications because they are also working with the UI. They are also there to offer to the users possibility to simply do transactions. But there are many other users that are doing this through a web page or through the browser. And yeah, with the cryptocurrencies, we have the blockchain, which is here to stay for years to come as well. Because yeah, it got its popularity through the cryptocurrencies, through the mining, but as it turns out, it's widely used within the metaverse. Now the banks are considering to implement blockchain because of the better security of the transactions, the stability, the peer processing, etc. So this is something that will stay here. But yeah, for how long, or is it going to stay in the same form as it is now? I cannot tell at the moment, but definitely it's something we want to pay attention in the future. And yeah, I've spoke already about the metaverse and the WebGL as a domain that currently gets a lot of traction, and it will continue to grow, especially having in mind that Facebook is moving toward that direction. There are a lot of users and companies as well that are blindly following Facebook. So even today, we can consider it as not really popular or something new. On the internet, you can find more than 1 million metaverses that are present. They are built in such a short time. They all use blockchain. They all use cryptocurrencies. Maybe they don't do anything in particular. You can simply, I don't know, create your avatar and that's all. Or maybe you can buy something and that's all. But at the end of the day, having 1 million of applications or even more tells us that this really gains the focus of the public, the interest of the public, and definitely even more companies will follow this path and more users will join to this. I hope we are not going to work in a metaverse like going to work within a metaverse. We are still going to go at the office or from home, but yeah, it's really interesting to see how it's going to develop in future. I don't know. What do you think
It will
about
be-
telco domain?
It's hard to estimate at this point. Really, there are lots of weird things going on with cryptocurrencies as of recently. If you look the charts, it looks depressing right now. So, as for blockchain, it will more overgrow. I mean, it will definitely expand into more standard, conventional domains like banks using it. They have nothing against it. I know that. And regarding crypto trading, that's a big unknown at the moment. I think just a day or two ago, Russia announced that they will legalize cryptocurrency trading, but still, it's hard to know at this moment. I wouldn't bet on it right now, but that technology is here to stay.
Okay. Anyone? Something to ask? Something to add? What's your opinion? Maybe let's hear who wants to speak. No, you are too shy. Maybe somebody who is on the channel online that wants to add something. Okay, so until someone decides to ask something, I have just one question. I will answer it shortly. And yeah, sorry. So the question is how you decide what is best approach for some feature using Redux or GraphQL for API calls if you have both tools in the project. Well, depends on what's the feature or the problem that has to be solved. If it's something, I don't know, maybe that can be kept within the local state, within the store locally, and doesn't impact the database or the result within the database, then most likely using Redux is enough. But still, if we have to collect data from many different sources from the API, like not just from one endpoint, then GraphQL is a better option because it can collect them in one set and provide us all at once on the front-end side, or take them from the front end and split them accordingly for the backend to understand which parts where needs to be stored. So let me rephrase. If you have to contact with one API endpoint and just deal with one set of data, which is like entity for that endpoint, then Redux is totally fine. But if you have to mix of data or do some mixes of different API calls, then GraphQL is a better thing to be used. At least that's my opinion.
Well, I would agree. But Redux is always safe fallback option.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's nothing wrong if you do things a little bit more manually. I mean, but by the time you will probably know, by the time you start working with this, whether the GraphQL is the better approach. But Redux will always work, or Redux Toolkit as a simplified version.
Okay. So let's hear.
What do you think about frameworks like Next.js? Okay. What do you think about frameworks like Next.js and Remix and their application in larger projects?
I'm not really familiar with Remix, so I cannot speak about that, but Next.js is definitely something good to be used and way to go, especially if, it's okay to use Node.js on the backend side. Next.js provides a lot of things that are already done that before Next.js, we had to create them manually. So instead of spending a lot of time doing that manually, you can simply use Next.js. And of course, at least for security of the backend part, like securing from cross-site scripting, DDoS attacks, etc. Next.js has some out-of-the-box solutions. Of course, they will work in, let's say, 90% of the cases. For some of them, you'll have to add some additional things. But yeah, definitely it's something that I would encourage for people to use.
Yeah, and all big frameworks have some their variation. There is Nux, there is Insult, there is SaltKit. That is the next big thing that they're working on. And I mean, this is the modern trend. This is the go-to solution. Depending really on also on what side are you on. Do you care about SEO, or is it is the application, for example, our application is mainly geared towards people that will be working behind the login wall. So it's not meant to be used broadly. So in that case, you can decide whether to use it or not. But I'd say it's a trend.
Okay. Any other question? Yeah. Anna?
I have one specific question. What is best practice for using relational data in the Redux?
Well, you're not using them directly anyways. They come through APA. So if you have standard CRUD, like by the book, then most likely creation of proper mapping on the front-end side would be great. For example, if we take NGRX that comes from Angular, which is covered with EricJS on the background, it provides an option to the users to create their own entities, but actually each entity is kind of proper mapping to the APA result and cuts a lot of on the boiler code that is provided. So for Redux, I believe there is no by-the-book solution that comes out of the book. You'll have to, I don't know, either create your own solution, but at the end of the day, even if you find some library, providing proper matching between the front end and the API response, it's always the best idea. Regardless, is that RESTful APA actually, is it using a relational database or it uses MongoDB or non-SQL?
Thanks.
Yeah, I guess you could always rely on the database. So I work on the bot end, so I'm a bit more familiar with this. In the end, by default, you should probably rely on the database to provide all the data. But still, you can emulate basically what relational databases are doing. In our project, on some places, we are using actually pivot tables, for example, and it really helps, depending on the case, how you want to structure the state. So we have a very complex state in NGRX store, and we are actually using pivot tables. I mean, it's rare, it's not the norm. Actually, it's not recommended, but if you need that functionality, I guess you can do it manually. And the same also applies to Redux. I mean, NGRX pretty much, Redux adapted to Angular, so you can do it, but I would still opt to let the backend handle it. It's dangerous, I mean, if you mix it.
Yeah, so it turns out that each response should go through some filtering first, so you can level up what's a good structure for you. Are you going to follow blindly what's coming from the APA and put that within the store? Or you are going to reorganize the data in something more meaningful on the front end, then keep them on the store, but when you have to return them back to the APA, you will have to filter them once again to get them in a proper format that is required by the APA. So yeah, shortly, the database shouldn't do any difference, at least in this case. This is more like how do you want to handle the data within the application. Okay, anyone? Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question. What is your opinion about using third-party libraries or components? And sometimes we are making compromise to use it because of deadlines, and eventually they can lose the support and prevent us to upgrade our framework.
Well, if it's free by license, MIT or GPL 3 or whatever was the standard, then it's quite okay. But that's the first rule. You always have to check, is it free? Because yeah, you might not be aware that you will impact some additional issues to the client if the license is not okay. But let's say that that's okay. I always prefer to have custom-made solution if we have time. Like I know that there is existing carousel library that you can take it, place it, put the images, and that's cool. But you can also build carousel library in less than 4 hours, for example. And what's the difference? If you make your own solution, of course, if you know what you're doing, it will be easier for maintenance and for customization in the future. If you take the library, you are limited to what's offered of the library. If you get to the point where you have to rewrite the library to add extra features or to remove, then you're on a wrong path or wrong direction, because you will spend a lot of more time doing that instead of erase everything and build something by your own. And of course, not all libraries are performant or developers taking care about the performance. If you take library from, I don't know, developed by IBM, for example, most likely they did take care about the performance part, how the library perform, not just within the rendering, but as well within the bundling, the page loading, etc. But if you take from some random developer that had free time to create library and want to help to the society, that doesn't often mean that he or she took care about the performance part and yeah, any possible issues that might happen. So that's the main difference. Of course, if there is no enough time, if there is a library that fills all the boxes, it works like expected, it has free license, then it's okay to be used. But if any of these checkboxes is not okay, then you should probably do some simple math. How much time you will need to spend to rework some parts in comparison to build that from scratch.
And other than license, you must always check whether it's actively maintained.
Yeah.
That's a very easy trap to fall into. And personally, I'm against it. I will try to avoid it if I can. But there are some big-sized problems that are typical for many applications. Something that's very similar to what I'm currently doing on is, for example, multi-language translation. So for those kind of tasks, you usually have some robust library that is working very well, that is well maintained. You can see it's being used a lot. So that option I would pick. But if it's something smaller that I'm not sure about, I would always prefer to build it myself, if possible, if there is time.
If we take a core JavaScript developer, it will do everything with vanilla JavaScript, no library, no anything. The fact we are using, let's say, any of these frameworks or libraries to start with tells us that we are okay to use these third-party libraries, just not to overdo it or overuse it. Like if you have a project that has, I don't know, 3 features with 10 pages each, and you have 40 libraries, something is wrong there. You should have, let's say, 10 maybe, including those that are coming defaultly with the framework or the library itself. So yeah, it's a wage, give it or take it, but at the end of the day, depends on the team, on the time, and many factors. There is no right or wrong, I would say, just recommendations. Okay, yeah, so we were talking a lot of about the trends and the future, and yeah, probably we'll end with some conclusion about what should we expect about the future itself. So yeah, I start with that and probably will end with that. It's good to know that the battle is not anymore about which library or framework. Now it's between should we learn the basics and be better within the language itself, or should we focus on simply getting everything from Stack Overflow or from libraries and putting them somehow to work together? Both ways have their own way in terms of functioning. Sometimes maybe you can find everything on internet, combine that will work exactly as it should. But most of the time, it's not going to work. So you will end up that if you didn't want to learn about JavaScript and TypeScript, you'll have to get back to learn that, and then to relearn everything you know about the framework or the library you are using, and to start building everything from scratch, if possible, of course. Then, yeah, the future brings us even better stability of the front end, because all of the frameworks are somehow leveling to each other. So whatever Angular offers, there is alternative for that in React, in Vue, and vice versa. And somehow they're stealing their best things from each other. And yeah, either that there are no observables currently within React, they will come there because they are really used by people who are working with Angular, and when they have to switch from Angular to React, of course they will have to learn React if they don't know it, but React.js is going to be something they will bring with them within React, meaning they will implement observables. With that, at given point, not maybe React.js, but something similar will take part of the React and even Vue.
And this also already happened with TypeScript, by the way. It started with Angular only. I mean, Angular was enforcing it. You could not use pure JavaScript anymore. So, and now everyone is using TypeScript. Like, you can now start the React project with the TypeScript default language automatically from CLI. Same for Vue, same for Svelte, other networks. So it just became the new standard that is coming. So I also agree that eventually RxJS and the whole reactive pattern will spread out, not only to Angular, because realistically RxJS is a standalone library. I mean, it's mostly used by Angular, but nothing stops you from using anywhere. So this will probably come.
Yep. And yeah, Node.js is here to stay for many years, probably. There were some tries to replace it with Dino, Koa, or whatever the names were of these other frameworks, but that was not really successful. Because first, yeah, the team that's behind Node.js, it's constantly active. It provides new features, it maintains it, and it provides a huge spectrum of APIs that can be used within Node.js. While these others were really limited, like you have file system, but you can do just simple operation with file system, where within the node, you can do pretty much everything that the operation system can do. With the file system, you can do the same with Node. And probably the biggest benefit of Node itself, I don't know, they didn't manage how to put it on some small device like a smartwatch. Because on the mobile phones, if the phone is unlocked by the, that's applicable for Android currently, if the phone is unlocked, you can actually install Node.js and run application through Node.js for whatever you want on the device itself. So you don't have to go to Play Store to download something. You can build your own application within Node.js, run it within the phone through the Node.js, and have it on the UI as a PVA application and use it further. But yeah, that's still not a standard. But my idea was that it's possible to run on mobile device. It's possible to run on as well. Tablets, laptops, TVs, these entertainment systems within the cars, like the board computer of the car. Where else? I don't know. I mean, there are a lot of places where you can install and run Node.js, and with that, you can run pretty much everything that runs on JavaScript or which is written on JavaScript. That means that we are still to see where we will have to start to work with JavaScript. Currently, yeah, we are mainly limited to, let's say, these user devices, or mostly used like laptops, phones, etc., and mainly within a browser. But yeah, having in mind there is Electron, having in mind there is React Native, and others, definitely the front end as a role spreads across different platforms, and eventually there are new things to come with it. So yeah, this is pretty much where I end with this thought, but definitely if you have some questions, want to discuss more, and yeah, I will give the words for Miroslav to add something more.
Well, not much to add. I mean, for us developers, Node is a must. There is no substitute for that. You may not like NPM. You can choose Yarn, but for Node, this is our tool. This is our hammer, metaphorical. There's no substitute for that. And I don't see it being replaced by anything. The Dever tries, as Igor mentioned, but this is the gold standard today.
Okay, so anyone to add something? Maybe you want to have a chat. It doesn't have to be a question. Maybe you can share your experience on the projects or with certain libraries. Of course, if you feel comfortable and if you're not shy. That also applies for the audience that is following us through the Webex channel. Okay.
I have a question. What's the advantage of Composition API compared to Options API in U3?
Well, I can tell you only for the composition, where simply you can create functions or hooks like in React, but with that actually you can create these custom hooks, the same approach that React has, which previously was supported in the version 2, but it was supported through a plugin that should be added to Vue.js itself. Now it's provided out of the box. And yeah, definitely having this more functional programming approach instead of like building something that it's a class, but it's not a class, building a function that is not a function was not really useful. So with the Composition API, actually we got the point where if I want function, I can create function and reuse that function pretty much everywhere, where I can share the state or pass the data through it, etc. So that's the main benefit.
And there is another benefit of simply readability. With the old way, you typically have data that is returning a function returning an object, and you have some piece of data here, and then you have the methods that is here and maybe on-mounted or hook that is below. So in big components, although if the component is too big, this is typically your mistake. But sometimes you just have big component and then you would have to trace it on multiple places. With Composition API, everything is packed together, like fits on one screen. This is what Evan at least said, that it greatly improves readability, to quote him on that. So this is another benefit. But the good thing is they're not enforcing anything. You can still choose what approach to take.
Okay. Anyone that wants to add something else? Okay. Then, yeah, I would like to thank you about the time today, for being here with us, to being part of this discussion, and to hear us about what we have to say to you and tell to you. I would like to wish you a great weekend. It will be soon. So yeah, at least for today, have a great day.
And thanks to Niche Office for having us today.
Bye bye.